The discovery of Göbekli Tepe in Anatolia, Turkey, has deemed it the oldest known megalithic site in the world by mainstream science. Since it was unearthed by Dr. Klaus Schmidt in 1996, Göbekli Tepe's circular temples have forever changed the way archaeologists look at the beginnings of civilization, and in more ways than one. In 1997, an expert on cereals, Professor Manfred Hune at the Norwegian University of Life Sciences, started investigating an area close to Göbekli Tepe for evidence that would lead him to the first grains. His discovery of einkorn, an ancient single-grain wheat, took him 20 miles northwest to the mountain of Karadag, the same mountain Anton Parks was able to trace the Sumerian version of the Garden of Eden. Hune believes this grain was the first cereal and older than any other grain known to man. The extensive lab results proved that the specimens of einkorn and emmer wheat dated back to 10,500 years ago. An article boasting his work stated, just as the dog evolved from the wolf and pigs evolved from boars, our cereals have been significantly altered by human civilization. But what if humans were altered by the cereals they ate as well?
The area of Turkey called Anatolia plays a huge role in the human story. As far as we know, that's where the first indications of organized agriculture appear. And they appear around about 11,600 years ago. Why these things should have happened in Anatolia rather than somewhere else isn't really a question I can absolutely answer, except to say that perhaps the land was conducive to what needed to be done there. We're to envisage a group of hunter-gatherers who wake up one morning equipped with all the skills necessary to create what does turn out to be the largest megalithic site on Earth. Where did those skills develop? The only thing that archaeologists can do to explain this is kind of suggest that that must have been a specially gifted group of hunter-gatherers. They kind of gloss over the fact that we can't see any evidence of the evolution or development of these skills. Their only explanation can be that somehow a group of hunter-gatherers, even though we see no evidence of them practicing or learning how to do this, they must have woken up one morning just magically equipped with the ability to create this extraordinary, astronomically aligned, gigantic megalithic site. And just as by a sort of an afterthought, they also invented agriculture at the same time. That, believe it or not, is what we are being taught about Göbekli Tepe now.
It is interesting to point out that not very far from the Karadag site that I located, we find the city of Göbekli Tepe. It is indeed intriguing. And also something else similar. In Sumerian texts, you can find an important character, the goddess Nisaba. She is the goddess of agriculture, of writing, and of wisdom. Nisaba, the goddess of rations and wheat. Indeed, she can also be called Demeter in Greek. In general, she is considered to be one of Enki's daughters.
Was there really a goddess of wheat and of agriculture? And if so, did this goddess teach the hunter-gatherers the skills of farming? Graham points out that this might be more evidence of what he calls an outreach program.
Now, how are we to take all of this, and how can we put it into some kind of context? For me, what I think we're looking at is more evidence that there was a high civilization that we have lost track of. We have forgotten a very important part of our story. And fragments of that story crop up all around the world. What I think we're looking at is an outreach program reaching out to the hunter-gatherers in what we would call the Upper Paleolithic, and beginning to teach certain of them selected skills, giving them the gifts of civilization. I think what happened in Anatolia was that the survivors of a lost civilization wiped out during the cataclysmic episode that immediately preceded 11,600 years ago, chose Anatolia as one of the places where they would settle and attempt to rebuild or recreate what had been lost.
We have evidence that there were advanced civilization, there was advanced civilization or civilizations, advanced sophisticated cultures that arose before the end of the last ice age. So we can think in round terms of about 10,000 BC. There was a natural catastrophe that occurred at 9700 BC, snapped us out of the ice age. And what I've determined and piecing the evidence together is that what caused it at 9700 BC was a major solar outburst. People can think of solar flares, but much larger than anything we've ever seen or experienced in modern times. What's known as coronal mass ejections. In some cases, what would have looked like huge lightning bolts literally hit the surface of the Earth, melted glaciers virtually instantaneously. This released pressure set off earthquake activity, set off volcanic activity. And actually, in the present day, we now know that volcanic and earthquake activity correlates with solar activity, even in the present day. But when you had a massive solar outburst like this, it would have been order of magnitudes larger.
Did these ancient people survive a cataclysm so great that they started to rebuild a new society near the most important ancient monument at the time? A society that required a new kind of food.
The earliest evidence we have of cultivated grain is in southern Turkey near the Syrian border. Now, there were grains before that, but this is the cultivation of grains, which means it's a slightly different kind of grain, or something evolved or changed, something new about the grain that allowed it to be planted, that allowed people to settle and not be nomads. So civilization is to be dated from that one development, that one event. It's all about grain.
Is it possible that the agricultural revolution began near Göbekli Tepe because humans wanted to stay near the site, and to do so, they needed to feed the people that migrated to this ancient spot after a cataclysm? Could the old ways of gathering of wild wheat to eat have not been enough for such a population in one area? But how then could the cultivation of an intense amount of crops begin? Corey Good suggests that there might have been an intervention.
There was a great cataclysm that pretty much separated humanity, and the pre-Adamites were leading humanity at that time. Most of the pre-Adamites died in a cataclysm. The ones who did not die were spread out across the earth, and they began to reestablish civilization and bring humanity together and teach them animal husbandry and how to grow crops. Not just the grains, but a lot of corn. A lot of the different things that we harvest were genetically engineered by the non-terrestrial groups. They were brought here from another planet and genetically spliced with native plants. The reason we know this is that when you look back in the historical record, looking at fossils, you don't see these genetically engineered wheats or grasses. You only see the wild grasses. These crops seem to appear here out of the blue in the historical record. Historians have located ancient grains in Anatolia, Turkey. What are the chances that these grains are going to have their birthplace in the same place that humanity did?
Could the ancients have genetically altered the grasses of Earth? And if so, how did that modify the human DNA?
Food, as it pertains to our DNA structure, can literally be traced back to what we would call an interaction with what some people call the Anunnaki, with this non-human intelligence. Now, there was a goddess, and she was apparently a geneticist when you read these ancient Sumerian tablets. And it's at this time of interaction that pretty much every cereal grain appears on the earth. Before that, we just had nothing. We can't trace them past a certain point. And what's interesting is it's at this stage that ancient civilization just explodes. As soon as these cereal grains begin to appear, all of these ancient civilizations begin to appear. At first there was nothing, then all of a sudden we have civilization after civilization that have mathematics, culture, they're building monuments, they're performing agricultural feats. I believe that all of that can be equated to the introduction of these cereal grains into our DNA, because she was actually affecting human DNA at that time through a number of different experiments. And a lot of this might be where the Babylonian bloodlines are originated from.
Could the bloodlines, or elite, have been created as a result of the cultivation of wheat? If this is true, is it possible that this was the first hierarchy created within the human population between those that cultivate the land and those who benefit from it? If humans could not roam anymore for their food in the wild as they had done as hunter-gatherers, then did these humans fall into a system that would make them dependent on the cultivation of food to survive? Could evidence lead us back to the Garden of Eden?
We seem to trace everything back to this Garden of Eden as the cradle of civilization as well. And it appears that it is not the cradle of civilization, it is the cradle of re-civilization. A civilization prior had fallen, and afterwards, after a cataclysm, they then had to rebuild, and that is where they began.
But the idea of the Garden of Eden essentially is a metaphor for bringing and restoring order to the face of the earth. Now, that works on one level. On the other level, you can also establish a physical Garden of Eden where you have animal husbandry, you have the growth of cereal crop, structures which are now coherent. So all of these things are built up into a kind of an orderly environment, which by its nature, by people actually interacting with this orderly environment, they themselves rise from a state of barbarism into a state of order and perfection. And the people that kind of came up with this concept appear to have been people who are human or human-like, but somehow different. And they often are described as being very tall. They certainly knew about how to domesticate cattle and crops. So they obviously came from some kind of a godly caste. And but back then, you have to understand that gods were not necessarily people. Gods were forces of nature. But they were people who also personified those forces of nature. So they had the understanding, they had the processes of ancient knowledge, which goes back thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. And they tried to impose that on the actual land to bring humanity back into a state of order from this terrible catastrophe. They understood how nature works, the dynamics of the systems of the universe. So they became as gods. And this is where we get that sort of overlap of thinking that these people were themselves gods. They were actually godlike.
Could these godlike beings be the characters in the Sumerian text? Is it possible that these beings could be the elite the ancient texts talk about that bring cultivation to the human race? According to Jack Carey's research, a battle for humanity takes place between these gods, and the seeds are the only thing that will help the human population continue.
These are two examples of what are referred to as the Sumerian kings lists. A number of these kings lists have been found. These two of particular interest because they were found at different places at different times, and yet they contain exactly the same information. The larger one obviously contains more information than the smaller one, but yet they contain the core of the information is the same. And they basically tell us about a long period of time that spans more than 220,000 years, and cites a number of kings, the same kings by name and by region, that ruled the world. It also tells us that these kings were appointed by the gods in a statement that says that kingship was lowered to earth from heaven, or after kingship descended from heaven. And so we realize that this is most likely the beginning of the royal bloodlines on planet Earth. One of the key things that we read in these two particular tablets is, at the end of it, it says, and then the flood swept over. And I believe that this is what happened to this vanished civilization. And this brings us to the Sumerian connection. And we discover that there is, as there is with most parts of this planet, a very clear and distinct connection between the Sumerian civilization, the Sumerian tablets, and the civilizations of Southern Africa. And this is where we meet the Anunnaki gods, or the Anunnaki, as the Sumerian texts refer to them. And we meet Anu, Enlil, and Enki, what could be described as the Sumerian Holy Trinity. And we got to ask ourselves, well, what is all this activity in Southern Africa about? And as always, as we've mentioned before, it's always about the gold. We cannot separate our origins and our history from our obsession with gold. But I have to point out at this point that whenever the explorers from Europe, or should we call them the conquerors, not necessarily explorers, what they found was a huge amount of gold. All these ancient cultures seem to have a lot of gold, but they always told them that the gold doesn't belong to us. The gold belongs to the gods. And therefore, we realize that the Anunnaki were in charge of this vast gold mining empire on planet Earth, and the gold always belonged to them. So the ancient history of Southern Africa is all about the gold, but there's a more recent history that we can explore as well. And so we move on to what we can call the golden surprise. Because what we'll find, and this is a very important thing for us to digest, the Anunnaki were not interested in the shiny, metallic form of gold. This is where our obsession comes from. But the Anunnaki and the gods were interested in the white powder of gold, or the monoatomic form of gold. There are over 600 African mythologies that talk about the sky gods coming down to earth and doing a variety of things. The Zulu African tradition is a specifically interesting one because it comes from Southern Africa. And they refer to the sky gods as the Abelungu, who came down from the sky. And what did these Abelungu do? They created the humans. To do what? To be the slaves in the gold mines for the Anunnaki, for the gods. So let's turn to some more examples of more recent gold mining activity, because we cannot escape this thing of mining gold in Southern Africa. In the late 1400s, I mentioned already that the Portuguese came around the Cape of Good Hope, or the Cape of Storms, and they come on shore and they meet the native people and they find many stone ruins. And some of them are spectacular, like this image here of Great Zimbabwe, where the walls are 6 meters wide and 10 meters high. Clearly a very strong fortress for ancient cultures and ancient civilizations. When they asked the local people, whose land is this? They were told that this is the Terra dos Macomates. This is, in Portuguese, it means the land of the Macomati people. Well, we got to ask ourselves, who are the Macomati people? And the Macomati people are Dravidian gold miners that go back thousands of years, mining gold, trading with gold, and doing business between Southern Africa and Southern India. The Dravidians come from the southern part of India and Sri Lanka, and they are well known for their activities and trading with gold for thousands of years. From 700 AD, we have amazing stories from the island of Zanzibar, how Zanzibar was already doing business with the port of Sofala, doing business in gold, trading in gold. Well, where's the port of Sofala? If you don't know where Zanzibar is right between, it's a little island which is also has the terrible history of slavery, where slaves were exported from Africa into the rest of the world. But Zanzibar was a trading post with the port of Sofala. Now, the port of Sofala is further down south on the coast of Mozambique, and it's a well-known port that did a lot of trade into the rest of the world. I didn't realize how important this part of Southern Africa was. The Phoenicians did trade there, and pretty much all of the known world was trading with Southern Africa from the port of Sofala. In the 11th century, Ahmed al-Biruni describes the prosperous gold exports from the port of Sofala. And so we move on. And the gold was apparently a month journey inland from the port of Sofala. A month trekking inland, where do you get to? You get to Masvingo in Zimbabwe. And that's where you find Great Zimbabwe ruins. And this is a spectacular bit of discovery. Great Zimbabwe, or the House of Stone. Great Zimbabwe itself has far more mysterious meanings than just House of Stone, because encoded in the word Zimbabwe is Zimbabwe, Zimba. Simba, the lion, the roar of the lion, is connected to sound and resonance, and the ability to control sound and resonance that is related to the roar of a lion and the manipulation of sound. There is so much ancient mystery encoded in all of this stuff that it could keep us busy for the rest of our lives. When we get to Great Zimbabwe, we also meet the Monoatapa Kingdom. the great golden kings that were never defeated. And these were the ancient Southern African kings. And actually the Monoatomic kingdom stretched right across Southern Africa into Central Africa and into Zambia and Kenya and Tanzania. And it was a huge kingdom that lasted for hundreds of years. And these were the guys that were providing the gold for the traders that came to the port of Sofala. It's fascinating that the Monoatomic kingdom is also connected further south, southwest of Great Zimbabwe. We find about 400 kilometers, right on the border of modern-day Botswana, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. We find the famous ruins of Mapungubwe, where there's now a big museum, and the so-called ancestors of the great Zimbabwe ruins. So let's get back to the work in the Abzu and the Sumerian texts that talk about this place called the Abzu, where all the gold came from. There's some spectacular Sumerian translations that we get from Zechariah Sitchin. Now remember, he did not know about any of this when he was writing this stuff down. So what we're doing here is providing the physical evidence for much of his work. This translation is absolutely staggering. It says, in the Abzu, Enki plans was conceiving where to build his house, where for heroes dwellings to prepare, where the bowels of the earth to enter, to mine the gold. Now, is there a ruin or an ancient stone structure that could possibly be seen as Enki's home or Enki's abode? And I suggest that Great Zimbabwe is exactly that place, since Enki was the founder of this vast gold mining empire. And Great Zimbabwe is by far the most impressive of all the ancient ruins and structures in Southern Africa. I suggest that maybe this is the mine manager's house, the big white house on the hill. But there's a lot more to be said about Great Zimbabwe that we may get to in this series. So this is what Enki's house would look like from the air. And you see that very quickly it resembles the millions of stone structures and the stone circles in Southern Africa. Some of the most mysterious objects found at Great Zimbabwe were discovered and described by Theodore Bent in the late 1800s and very early 1900s. And these were the mysterious stone birds that can be linked to gold mining in Egypt and gold mining activity by the Anunnaki in Southern Africa. These stone birds are fascinating. They are very basic shapes. They're known as birds on pedestals, and some of the most basic ones is just an elongated stone that's got a wing carved into it, and then a little eye at the top of the stone. And normally the stone has got a rounded side that suggests that it's the head of the bird looking up at the sky with a bird, the wing underneath, like in this particular image on the right-hand side. That's a very good example of that. I found many similar bird-shaped stones in the stone ruins of Southern Africa, which makes me think that the Zimbabwe birds are a much later version of these very basic bird-like shapes, which is a broad base and a narrow head and a neck that leads up to the head that looks up for protection from the gods in the sky. And suddenly these birds become giant monoliths and giant standing stones that have been carved out into the shapes of birds in a much larger fashion than just smaller statues. Here is a translation once again that we find in Sitchin's work, referring to this gold mining activity and the creation of Adam and Adamu in Southern Africa. Let us create a Lulu, a primitive worker, the hardship work to take over. Let the being, the toil of the Anunnaki carry on his back. And it continues, where they decide to create the Adam, or the first being, as a slave. A primitive worker shall be created. Our command will he understand. Our tools he will handle. To the Anunnaki in the Abzu relief shall come. Over and over again, we hear about the Abzu, the gold mining, and a primitive worker that needs to be brought into existence to help the Anunnaki get more gold out of the ground. The Anunnaki, based on the descriptions in the Sumerian tablets, which Sitchin brings forth, is when they refer to Enki, is that they describe him being tall, having the hair the color of the sun and the eyes the color of the sky. So I guess he was, and he was light-skinned. So maybe the Nordics are closer to the Anunnaki than anyone else.
Now, you kind of hinted that they may still be around.
Well,
What do you mean?
Yeah, there's no doubt that the Anunnaki left behind their offspring. And there's definitely a huge global movement with Marduk, Enki's, one of Enki's sons, that was in charge. It seems like he was in charge of Egypt for a long time and various parts of that part of the world. And Marduk was left behind to look after this planet and did not necessarily do the kind of job that he was expected to do.
He didn't do a good job.
No, and so there are these two factions of the Anunnaki, those that left behind, that retained a lower level of consciousness and took the world in a very different, draconian kind of suppressive and oppressive direction that we are experiencing on this earth today, with absolute control through governments and oppression. And those that left, the higher consciousness Anunnaki, that allowed themselves to grow in consciousness. They are beings as well. Thousands and thousands of years have gone by. Their consciousness has exploded as well. And so now we have the higher consciousness Anunnaki and the low consciousness Anunnaki. And I believe those that left, being Enlil and Enki, are very active from a much higher dimension to restore the problems that have been caused by their offspring on this planet.
Well, they say that the Anunnaki that they were a warring group, that they attacked each other, and look what kind of folks we are on this planet. We're doing the same thing.
I think it gets even more complicated than that, because the Anunnaki were not the only ETs that were active on this planet. There were many, many others.
The Greys that we've heard.
The Greys, the Zeta Reticuli, the many others. And there are many researchers that speak about that aspect of it. And we need to take cognizance of that and see how the Anunnaki's activities here compares to the other interventions and activities of extraterrestrials. But it seems that the Anunnaki were the very powerful and I guess dominant ETs here, because of the giant gold mining operation that they created, and the fact that they were in this planet for minerals. And then they were joined by other ETs that came to this planet for more minerals.
Sure,
and
but they were the first?
It seems like it. At this stage, it seems like it.
Well, it's amazing how the book of Genesis kind of echoes this story if you look for that story.
Yeah. And what I find fascinating is when you read Genesis, and I come back to the gold, where you find it's very obvious that it's not humans that were obsessed with the gold, but it's the Anunnaki or the Elohim, because the Anunnaki also refer to themselves as the Elohim. This is critical to understand. And it is the Elohim in the Bible that first mentioned the word gold, not the humans. It's in Genesis.
Powdered gold too, right?
Yeah, but the word gold first comes to us from God, or the Elohim, in Genesis 2, when Eve had not yet been fashioned from Adam's rib. Adam was still alone on earth, and it's God that mentions the word gold. When he says there's a land called Havilah, there's great water, and the land is good, the water is good, and there is gold. And in there we find the clues that the Elohim were obsessed with gold and not the humans.
They used gold also in a powdered form, and they ingested it. What did it do to them?
Well, we know from the great works of people like David Hudson and other researchers, Lawrence Gardner, that speak about the white powder of gold, or the monoatomic gold, or the Bible refers to it as manna from heaven. And they seem to have used it as a curative substance to keep them healthy, to keep them physically immortal. It has numerous properties. It's a superconductor, so if you ingest it, basically what it does, it helps the circuits inside your body. Your nervous system becomes a superconductor then, so that you no longer have to take milliseconds for the information to travel, but it travels instantly throughout your body. So your DNA gets healed by it. You can cure disease with it. Plus, it levitates. And
it levitates?
It levitates. The white powder of gold levitates. David Hudson talks about when they were doing the laboratory experiments with MIT, when they had a little powder, fluffy powder in the tube of inert gas. When he brought his hand under it, a little pile of powder lifted up and levitates.
Huh.
So what that suggests that we actually have monoatomic elements in our bodies, because when you bring your hand above it, below it, it repels it. While a magnet, when you put a magnet there, it does nothing. They tried all kinds of things, bring under the white powder of gold. Only the human body would make it respond. So, and it's also interesting that it's the gold, because gold is not the only element that can be turned into monoatomic element from the group of elements that do that. There are about 9 or 11 of them, if I remember. Platinum group of metals,
sure.
yeah. But it's gold that seems to flux at body temperature. That's why they were interested in the gold alone, and not the other, not platinum or iridium or rubidium and so forth. The gold is the one they were looking after. And that is critical as well, because in South Africa, in the province of Limpopo, there are dozens and dozens of underground tunnels, ancient gold mining tunnels that were mined by the Anunnaki, because there's no other explanation for it. They're ancient. They were discovered in the 30s by modern gold miners. And in these tunnels, there's no gold, but there is platinum slag that's been left behind in these tunnels. So they weren't interested in the platinum, they were interested in the gold.
Tell me about these stone circle ruins that you've looked into.
Yeah, and that is, so glad you came back to that, because that is the thing that explains a lot about the Anunnaki, Enki, and this vast gold mining empire. Because the stone circles, first of all, there are more than 10 million of these circular stone ruins.
Everywhere?
They're all over South Africa, Zimbabwe, parts of Botswana, Mozambique, and I believe they cross over the Zambezi into southern Zambia as well. And they are what is best described as the factory that powered, and the factory and the power plant that was the giant gold mining empire of the Anunnaki. And they, all the stone circles are circular. Each one has a very unique design, because they actually, each one of them is an energy generating device. And I know this because we measured them. They create huge amounts of sound frequencies in the gigahertz, which is unheard of.
Were they built in these locations for a specific reason?
Yes, they were built on specific locations because they actually suck out the sound frequency, the sound energy of Gaia. And that's why each one is unique, because each one of the stone circles is a cymatic representation of the sound frequency on the surface of planet Earth. So it becomes like an energetic plug point into the Earth. And then they share the energy that they amplify because of the sound frequencies that these stone walls then amplify and generate electromagnetic fields out of the sound. So sound becomes a precursor to electromagnetic fields. And then they share this energy by these channels that connect all the stone circles together. So you got more than 10 million stone circles that I found or calculated that cover most of southern Africa. They're all connected by these channels. And they create this huge power plant that created the energy for the extraction of the gold, the technology that they use to extract the gold from the tunnels, and for the processing of the gold and the separation of the minerals and whatever they needed to do.
How did we lose this information, this knowledge?
Well, the flood, as we discussed already.
Wiped out everything?
The flood wiped it out. That seems to be a very important dividing line in human history, in recent human history.
And do you think that flood was generated on purpose, as the Bible dictates?
I don't think so.
Just a catastrophe?
I think it was a catastrophe, and the Anunnaki knew it was coming, and they prepared for it. And I also know they prepared for it because we have technology that has detected many, many tunnels that lie hidden below the soil.
Okay.
That technology exists. And we know that where those tunnels are, and we also know that those tunnels are still filled with gold. And that is a huge discovery.
What do you think? They saw an asteroid coming this way? And
well, either an asteroid
predicted where it was going to hit?
Yeah, either an asteroid or, as Sitchin suggests, that their planet or one of their moons was coming very close to planet Earth, and they knew that it was going to cause huge geophysical effects. And so the Anunnaki prepared for it. They hid all the gold in the tunnels underground, and many people would have then gone into the tunnels underground to try and hide from the flood.
And they got wiped out.
They got wiped out. So we found lots of tunnels that are filled with bones, human remains, and filled with gold. And there are thousands of them.
And they could be that old.
They definitely go back to about 12,000 years. In fact, there's one grave site that is very close to Adam's calendar that we are convinced is actually the grave site of Enki's youngest son, called Dumuzi. And the Sumerian tablets very clearly tell the story of Inanna and Dumuzi. And when Dumuzi died after the flood, so that's recent, that's like 12,000 years ago, right? And Inanna took him to the deep Abzu, where she buried him on the edge of a cliff near his father's special place, looking east, so that his soul would be everlasting. And there's a grave right there that we've detected with infrared technology, that there's a cavity about 3 meters deep and about 3 meters long. Now, a human grave would not be 3 meters long, it would be a lot shorter. And it's been confirmed by Baba Credo Mutwa, the preeminent Zulu shaman in South Africa, who said that there is an ancient king buried at that site. And that ancient ceremonies were performed there by shamans and elders for thousands of years at this site. It's what we call the stone altar, which was discovered by Johann Heine and myself. And that is connected to Adam's calendar, or which is Enki's calendar, built by Enki, which actually is a giant vortex. It's a double toroid vortex.
Billy, what is the Enuma Elish?
The Enuma Elish are 7 tablets of cuneiform writing that were date back over 7,000 years, and they're located at the British Museum. These cuneiform tablets actually talk about the creation of our solar system as we know it right now, including how Earth was created and how we acquired our moon. It's an amazing story, and it's hard to understand for the average person who starts reading it, because it almost sounds like it's people battling in the sky. But when you really break it down and understand it's the epic of the creation of our solar system itself.
That's amazing. It's almost biblical, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, the Bible copied a lot of the content from the Enuma Elish into Genesis.
At the British Museum, there's a fellow called Irving Finkel, and he talks a little about this. Billy, how in the world do they interpret that?
It's so amazing. I mean, really,
is.
You know, the thing that's so beautiful about it is, at the time, many people were copying the Sumerian language over into their own languages. So we had kind of a key to understand what the Sumerian text was saying. Luckily, because many people, the Sumerians almost seem to have branched out and kickstarted so many civilizations outside of themselves. And because of that, everybody translating, from the Sumerian into their own languages gave us a key to understand what those cuneiform texts were saying.
Tell us what you think happened many years ago.
The conclusion that I personally have come to is that there were beings, advanced beings that are our progenitors, that came to this planet in ancient times to strip mine this planet for resources, but not only Earth, the moon, Mars, and a couple of other moons of Jupiter as well. And they came to get these resources, and during that time frame, they lived here and mined this planet themselves for about 250,000 years. And then at one point, the working class became very agitated from the workload and decided that they were going to revolt against the leaders, which were Enki and Enlil. And at that time, a decision was made to create a slave worker, which would be, what we are, Homo sapien, from an existing hominid. They didn't literally create a human being from dust, but they took
something was already on the planet.
Something was already on the planet, and they took that something, that hominid, and they took an egg out of one, cleaned up the genetic material, put the Anunnaki genetic material inside of it, embedded it into the womb of one of the Anunnaki women, and she took it to full term and gave birth 10 months later to the Adamu, or the first man.
It sounds like Adam and Eve.
Absolutely.
Now, this person that you have mentioned several times, Enki, who was he?
Enki was a son of Anu. Anu was the main king, or the main leaders. That's where we get Anunnaki. Who came here. Okay, he came here a little bit after his sons arrived. They call them the heroes of old.
Right, the sons got here first.
Right, Enki and Enlil. Now, Enki, his actual name is Ea Enki. So Ea, the first 2 letters, A, and Ki was Earth. So he became the ruler, or the king of Earth, even though his brother Enlil ran everything.
Okay.
He should have been, he had a higher rank than Enlil, but something happened which it's not clear exactly how it happened, but his brother Enlil superseded him at some point and became, gained complete control of the planet, even though the planet was named after Enki.
And they had the ability to breathe our atmosphere, our air, and everything else?
Absolutely. They come from a planet that's most likely very similar makeup to Earth.
Okay. So we could live on that planet?
We could live on that planet, exactly.
Does any of this negate Genesis or the Bible, or does it augment it?
It actually augments it. It gives it a much bigger view. In other words, the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, all of these books, they mention Marduk and all these people, believe it or not. However, in a very short, small version of the story. If you look at the Epic of Atrahasis and the 7 Tablets of Creation, you get the big story. You get a much bigger epic versus what the Bible is taking small parts of it, somebody over time, many, many hundreds of years after the people that they're talking about, sometimes even thousands of years, are already gone and passed away. I think a lot of people confuse the Bible with being written in real time as events happen, but in true reality, the Bible was written hundreds of years after events happened. So you're looking at something that's basically just copied information from much more ancient texts and slightly modified.
Going back to the Anunnaki, Billy, and what they wanted, they came here, as you said, to mine gold.
Yes.
Zechariah Sitchin has always said they needed to sprinkle gold particles in their atmosphere almost to shield their planet from the sun. They're in our solar system. How does that work?
Well, gold is a very, very technological item or element. And I think that a lot of people who are into gold and gold jewelry and everything else, they don't realize that they've been fooled into thinking gold has a value for decoration and monetary means. Actually, what happened was, in ancient times, gold was mined by the Anunnaki before humans even got involved to create this substance, this powdered dust that they can actually hoist into their atmosphere.
Powdered gold.
Powdered gold. And to add credence to that, my vehicle that I actually drive doesn't have any window tint. It's a higher-end car, and the glass in my vehicle has powdered gold in the windows to reflect UV light, to keep the interior of the car cool.
Isn't that what the astronauts used as a shield
Absolutely.
when they went to the moon?
So you see, gold is very technological, and you need it for radiation-hardened computer circuit boards. You need it for satellites. The thing about gold is you get no loss of electricity, no matter how long the distance. It's a great electrical conductor. And you don't lose anything in friction. So and you can meld it. It's very malleable. You can mold it to almost any shape.
Billy, I've had a number of guests on Beyond Belief and also on the radio program Coast to Coast AM that have talked about this extra planet in the universe, in the solar system, called Planet X.
Yeah.
If it's a planet, if it's out there, call it Nibiru, why haven't astronomers told us about it?
They actually have. Just recently on Fox News, an astronomer came on there and he described not only that they've discovered it, but they've named it. NASA calls it Planet 9. This astronomer says they've called it Biden. They've nicknamed it Biden.
After Joe Biden?
Yeah, which is bizarre. Maybe he funded some of the research. I
don't know.
It's very possible. Yeah. But they even showed it on the little blip on the little show that they put up. And they've said it's extremely far beyond the orbit of Pluto, but it's orbiting its own star. It's got a brown dwarf star that it orbits. So we're talking about
in our solar system.
In our solar system, there's another solar system. He actually says it openly on TV. So we live in a binary solar system, and according to this astronomer, it orbits our sun every 4,200 years. And it's got its own little planetary solar system going around it.
That's where the Anunnaki are.
Well, he says that's what the astronomer said, which blew me away. That's where we came from. I almost had to play it back. Matter of fact, I looped it on my video channel because I wanted to hear it over and over again. He said, we're looking at where we came from.
So this planet, we'll call it Nibiru, inhabited with the Anunnaki, are they still there, in your opinion, on that planet?
That's a good question. They may have already left and expanded and spread out more. They were already, in my opinion, a species that had already spread out from maybe the Pleiades. And the reason why I get that is because a lot of the ancient artifacts that I've looked at now, going around the world to different places and seeing some of these artifacts in museums, they usually depict the Pleiadian star cluster and the Orion, and sometimes Sirius. So I'm really starting to think that they are an intergalactic species. And even in one of the epics, one of the Anunnaki gods takes on a wife from another planet. So, I mean, this is some real Star Wars type stuff here. I really think that
really is.
they're everywhere, man. I believe they may still be living in our solar system. Now we have a new area of the solar system called the inner Oort cloud, where there are all kind of rogue planets and things out there that shouldn't exist, that we didn't think could possibly exist. And I think that it's important for people to understand. A lot of people saying, is it going to come back and crash into our Earth? I don't think that this object is going to crash into the Earth. But what I think is happening is it's dislodging debris from the Oort cloud and sending it streaming toward the inner solar system, which is probably why Obama signed the executive order a few years ago to have a mission to a comet to try to learn how to shift its orbit, because we have to learn how to avert, of course, annihilation from some of these objects. And there's a lot of them out there, and a lot coming toward the inner Earth, inner orbits.
Now, why do they say that this extra planet, Planet X, that comes around every 3,600 years based on Sitchin's theories, plays a havoc with the planet? May have contributed to the Great Flood, may have contributed to other disasters on this planet. Why did they say that?
Because similar to Mars, where Mars has a very strange orbit where it orbits closer to the sun and then further away at times, this object kind of does the same thing. As it comes towards the orbit of our sun, it comes in pretty close and creates a breakaway speed. Now, not close enough to interact directly with our inner solar system planets where it's going to crash into anything. Not anymore, I don't believe. But I believe that because of the gravity of the brown dwarf star that it orbits, it has a direct effect on creating earthquakes, different type of storm patterns, melting our ice caps.
Somewhere along the line, as we talk about all of this, the Anunnaki coming here, looking at whatever species might have been on the planet at the time, let's call it Neanderthals.
Yeah.
And they saw that and said, no, we need workers who are going to listen to us and brain, so we genetically alter them and we do all that. And then in the Bible, it makes it seem like it was just a God that did it, fallen angels, to me being extraterrestrials who came down here and things like that. Let's tuck all that aside for a second, Billy. Somewhere along the line, somebody had to create the Anunnaki.
Yes.
What about this theory of who is God? What started it all? You had to have something happen first.
Yeah.
That's what's so amazing to me. Somewhere at the end of the line, you've got to have a real beginning.
Right.
What is that beginning?
That's the biggest question of them all, because even if we live in a holographic universe and we're living in a simulation which was created, which would really easily explain how you can have multiple types of beings that just pop up on the scene with intelligence, I don't really believe in the standard version of evolution. I believe that there's microevolution, but macroevolution I think is a little bit different. I think things are created.
Sure.
But at the top of the list, as you go up many levels, where does it all begin? That is one of the biggest questions. If we're living in an ancestor civilization of an ancestor civilization, at some point, when do we get to base reality? And if we get to base reality, well, how did that begin? The questions just create more questions. It's very difficult to answer.
Will we ever get that answer?
Maybe not while we're living or inhabiting these avatar bodies. Maybe after we transcend this dimension into a higher realm, maybe then we'll have a better understanding.